The first time
Life
I
is
saw her,
long,
she was
but
sitting
these
by the
moments are what
floor-to-ceiling
truly
window,
matter.
sunlight painting
I
her hair in
cherish this
streaks
time
of
with
copper
you.
and gold. My books had
Sunlight
slipped from my
caught her
hands.
hair,
I
and
swear,
suddenly the
gravity
city
itself
outside
seemed to
didn't
slow
exist.
down. And for a
Eyes
moment,
met,
the bustling
breath.
city
Can't be
outside
serious. That's
didn't
impossible.
exist. I couldn't
On the
even name the
contrary, it's the
emotion
only
that
thing that
knotted
makes
my
sense.
chest.
I thought you were smarter than
Admiration,
this.
curiosity, something dangerously close to longing. I was 23, scrappy, tired, and used to scraping by on part-time jobs and ramen noodles. She was, well, impossible. A woman in her mid-40s with an air that didn't beg for attention, but somehow commanded it anyway. Her name, I later learned, was Eleanor. She was quiet in a way that suggested she didn't need to fill space with words. Yet when she spoke, the room leaned in to listen. I shouldn't have been here. The apartment, a penthouse overlooking the river, wasn't meant for students like me. But a random twist of fate, a desperate plea, and Eleanor's surprising generosity had landed me in her home. Technically her husband and him only, though the marriage had been more of a legal arrangement than a love story. 7 days in, and the lines were already blurred. I remember the way she walked into the kitchen that morning. Barefoot, her silk robe brushing her calves, the soft click of her jewelry punctuating her every step. She didn't look at me, and yet I felt her eyes skimming over my shoulder. Something almost imperceptible, an acknowledgement, made my stomach twist. I turned the page of my textbook, pretending the complex formulas of economics mattered more than the way my heart raced. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice casual. But there was a hesitation behind it, the kind that makes you wonder if she's weighing words against something unsaid. "Thanks," I muttered, hoping I didn't sound too eager. I watched her pour it, steam curling around her fingers, and I thought, God, how is it fair for someone to seem so untouchable and yet so close at the same time? She set the mug in front of me and smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling in a way that felt both intimate and accidental. I caught my reflection in the dark surface of the coffee, messy hair, tired eyes, but also a quiet hope I hadn't allowed myself in years. I didn't know if it was the caffeine or Eleanor herself, but suddenly the world seemed sharper, warmer, more alive. We didn't speak much after that. Words felt unnecessary. The city hummed outside, but inside there was only the soft clink of cutlery, the occasional sigh, the brush of her presence near mine. Every glance, every pause, every micro-expression carried a weight I couldn't name. I wanted to reach out, touch her hand, ask her what she thought about me, about us, but the risk of breaking something fragile kept me frozen. Then, as if the universe had decided to punctuate the moment, the doorbell rang. Sharp, sudden. My stomach dropped. Eleanor's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of concern, or was it anticipation, crossing her face. Her hand hovered near the intercom, fingers trembling just slightly, betraying the calm she always wore like armor. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. Whoever or whatever was waiting on the other side, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. And in that heartbeat, watching her hesitate, the distance between us felt both terrifying and magnetic. I realized, with a clarity that made me dizzy, that I had already crossed a line I didn't even know existed. The doorbell had stopped echoing, leaving a strange kind of silence in its wake. Eleanor didn't move immediately, her hand hovering in the air as if the very act of pressing the intercom could change something inside her. I wanted to reach out to steady her, but I didn't. I realized then how much of her world I wasn't allowed to touch, yet how desperately I wanted to. Later, as she poured herself another cup of coffee, I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the chipped rim of her mug, tracing invisible patterns. "I wasn't always like this," she said quietly, almost to herself. I looked up, startled by the sudden vulnerability in her tone. "I mean," she continued, "I've had mistakes, choices I wouldn't make again." Her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee. "Love can be complicated." I nodded, pretending to focus on my notes, but I wanted to ask everything and nothing at the same time. I didn't know what mistakes meant exactly, whether it was failed marriages, lost children, or regrets too heavy to speak. Her pause felt like a door left slightly open, and I caught myself staring too long, wondering if it was safe to step inside. For my part, my story was simpler but no less jagged. 23, barely scraping by, falling for someone who could buy a dozen lives with a flick of her fingers. I had never met anyone like Eleanor. My past romances had been small, safe, almost forgettable. Here, I felt like a reckless fool dangling over an edge I didn't want to step back from. And the age difference, God, it wasn't just years, it was worlds. Yet every time she laughed softly or brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, it became less about caution and more about desire. There was risk everywhere. Not just the age, not just the legality of our situation, but the simple fragility of hearts in places they shouldn't be. I had tried to tell myself, more than once, that this was temporary, a whim of circumstance. But when she looked at me across the room, her gaze gentle and patient, my chest betrayed me with every beat. That afternoon, she walked past me in the hallway, just close enough that the scent of her perfume, something soft like vanilla and cedar, brushed against me. I flinched, though she didn't notice. My hand brushed hers by accident, or maybe on purpose, and I felt it, a spark, quiet and electric. Neither of us spoke, but the air between us thickened. "You play guitar, don't you?" she asked suddenly, gesturing to the instrument leaning in the corner. I hesitated. A little. Her smile was soft, almost teasing. "Play something for me sometime. I like that." And just like that, a small bridge had formed between us, a shared expectation, an unspoken invitation. I didn't know what the next step was, or if I even had the right to take it, but for a moment, the world narrowed to a single, fragile connection. Her hand near mine, the warmth lingering after contact, and the quiet acknowledgement that we were both thinking about crossing a line we weren't supposed to. I wanted to tell her everything, how I felt, how terrified I was, how impossible it all seemed, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, feeling the pulse of something unnameable, a shared tension that bound us tighter than any conversation ever could. I didn't mean to linger in the hallway, but I couldn't move. Eleanor had gone into the living room, humming softly to herself as she adjusted a vase of fresh lilies. I could feel her presence across the polished floor, closer than it should have been, yet a wall of unspoken rules kept us apart. Then the sound of keys rattling in the lock made me flinch. Her husband, or at least the man who signed the papers that made this arrangement legal, was home earlier than expected. I froze, heart hammering. Eleanor's posture stiffened, her hand brushing the back of a chair as if trying to anchor herself. "Eleanor," a voice called from the hallway. Calm, familiar, and suddenly terrifying. She turned, masking any trace of what had passed between us that afternoon with the effortless grace of someone who had spent decades learning to control her expressions. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted and my chest felt like it would split in two. "Everything okay?" the man asked. Yes, just rearranging some flowers," she replied, her tone light, almost dismissive. And yet, the faintest quiver in her fingers betrayed her calm. I backed out silently, retreating to my tiny study nook, my mind racing. Why did it feel like the walls themselves were conspiring against me? Every glance, every shared smile with Eleanor had suddenly become dangerous. The knowledge of her husband's proximity made every suppressed thought, every small thrill of touch, more potent, more forbidden. Later, she appeared at the doorway, catching me off guard. "You're quiet," she said softly. Her voice was measured, but there was a tremor beneath it. I was just thinking," I muttered, trying not to let the panic show. She stepped closer, just a fraction of a step, but close enough that I felt the warmth radiating off her. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The papers, the city outside, the impossibility of us. Maybe, she started, then hesitated. Her lips pressed together, and her gaze fell to the floor. Maybe some things are harder than they should be. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her that yes, everything between us was dangerous and messy and impossible, but also everything I wanted. But guilt kept my hand at my side. And then the phone buzzed. I jumped, startled. Eleanor's face stiffened as she glanced at the screen. A message from someone I didn't know. Her thumb hovered over it, lingering in a way that made my stomach twist. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "If you have to go now," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't, not today." I hesitated, torn between obeying reason and the pull that had me leaning closer every time she was near. And then, just as I turned to leave, she exhaled softly, almost inaudibly, a sound that was more confession than comfort, more admission than denial. I left the room, but the echo of her breath followed me. It was a tether I couldn't cut, and I knew, even as I stepped back into my corner of the world, that nothing would be the same tomorrow. The line between restraint and surrender had been drawn, and both of us were teetering dangerously close. I had spent the entire afternoon trying to focus on my notes, but the words swam on the page. Every time I thought of Eleanor, every subtle glance, every accidental touch, it was like a spark under dry leaves, dangerously close to flames. And now, she was standing at the doorway, holding a stack of papers, her robe slightly open at the collar, the faintest scent of her lingering in the air. I need your help," she said, voice low, almost fragile. Her eyes didn't meet mine at first, and when they did, I felt like she had peeled back every layer of armor I had around my heart. "What kind of help?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Sorting these contracts," she murmured, though she wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at me, and in that look, I saw something that made my chest tighten, vulnerability, and maybe even a hint of trust one wasn't meant to earn. I moved closer, trying to ignore the irrational heat rising in my chest. Our hands brushed over the papers. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. My fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, and I felt the silent thrum of electricity. Then she sighed, a sound that was half relief, half tension. I shouldn't be like this," she whispered, almost to herself. "Like what?" I asked, though I already knew. My own throat tightened as the forbidden words hovered, unsaid. Her eyes darted away, and for a second, I thought she might retreat. But then she spoke again, almost too quickly. "I don't know how to stop thinking about you." The room seemed to collapse inward, the air between us charged and fragile. My pulse spiked. I opened my mouth, but the words jammed. Desire, guilt, fear, everything tangled in a knot I couldn't unravel. And then, the unmistakable sound of a text notification shattered the moment. She glanced at her phone, and I glimpsed the sender, someone important, someone from her world that I didn't belong in. My stomach dropped. I realized with sudden panic that our time, our connection, was always under threat. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she held the papers. I can't let this happen," she said, voice shaking now. Not the voice of a wealthy, untouchable woman, but a woman caught between desire and reason, teetering on the edge. I want to take her hand, hold her, tell her it didn't matter, that nothing else mattered. But I didn't. Instead, I just stepped closer, close enough to feel her warmth, to see the fine line of tension along her jaw, to sense the rapid pulse at her wrist. She inhaled sharply, and for a moment, I thought she might flee, or that I might collapse into the temptation that had been building between us for days. The air hummed, thick with unsaid confessions and unacknowledged longing. And then she looked at me, really looked at me, her lips parting slightly as if she were on the verge of saying something monumental. My heart lurched. I wanted to speak first, but But the words were trapped, leaving only silence, heavy and impossible. Outside the window, the city carried on unaware, but inside, the world had narrowed to a single point. Eleanor, the tremor in her hands, the heat of her gaze, and the unrelenting pull between us. And just as I stepped forward, ready to bridge the last inch between restraint and surrender, the doorbell rang again. The story now reaches maximum emotional tension. Eleanor is on the edge, and the boy is dangerously close to acting on desire. But an external interruption leaves the climax unresolved. The doorbell's echo still lingered when Eleanor finally tore her gaze from me. Her fingers hovered over the intercom, then she pressed it, her lips pressed tightly together. I stepped back, unsure whether to follow or give her space, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Hello," she said, voice carefully neutral. There was a pause, and then a familiar, casual drawl that sent a chill down my spine. "Eleanor, it's me." Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic, and she stepped aside to let someone in. I froze in the hallway as the last person I expected entered. Julian, her ex-husband's business partner, or someone who had been involved in her life far longer than I had. His smile was polite, but his gaze lingered on her in a way that suggested unspoken history. "You didn't tell me you'd be in town," Eleanor murmured, masking tension with a practiced calm. "I thought I'd surprise you," Julian replied smoothly. And then, without warning, he glanced at me, really looked at me, and something in his eyes shifted. Curiosity, recognition, judgment. I wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Eleanor caught my eye briefly, her lips twitching, and I saw it. The weight of a secret she hadn't shared, something I wasn't supposed to know. Julian's presence flipped the air. Every heartbeat, every stolen glance, every lingering touch between Eleanor and me suddenly felt exposed. The risk wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was tangible. I need to finish these," Eleanor said, stepping in front of me as if to shield me. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. I noticed the fine tremor in her hands as she clutched the stack of papers. "Of course," Julian replied, oblivious, or pretending to be, to the tension crackling in the room. "I'll leave you two to it." But his eyes lingered on us one last second before he exited, leaving a trail of unease behind. When the door clicked shut, Eleanor exhaled sharply, sinking against the wall. I stepped closer, my instincts warring with caution. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice low. She shook her head, a faint laugh escaping her lips, brittle and raw. No, I'm not." Her gaze met mine, pleading yet uncertain. "I didn't think he'd come back. Not now. Not when you're here." I swallowed hard. Every cell in me wanted to reach out, to hold her, to anchor her, but I hesitated. The boundaries we had been tiptoeing along were suddenly razor sharp. I shouldn't let this feeling grow," she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her eyes glimmered, torn between restraint and desire. And yet, when her hand brushed mine, just once, lightly, almost accidentally, I felt the pull again, stronger than before. We were tethered by risk and temptation, by secrets and unspoken longing. The outside world, Julian, the legal arrangements, that didn't matter in that heartbeat. All that mattered was the raw intensity of what we felt and the knowledge that any choice could change everything. I wanted to ask her to trust me, to step into the fire with me, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I just stayed close, the tension between us electric, unbearable, and impossible to ignore. And then, from somewhere deep inside, I realized the game had changed. Nothing about this was safe anymore, and we were both willingly on the edge. The city lights outside the window blurred, but inside, every detail felt sharp. Eleanor's robe slipped slightly at the shoulder as she paced, her hands clutching the papers like a lifeline. I stood frozen, heart hammering, knowing that nothing we had done, no stolen glance or accidental touch, had prepared us for this. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice cracked, raw and unpolished. "Not with you. Not anymore." I stepped closer, though every rational thought screamed to stop. "Then don't," I said, voice low, almost a plea. "Whatever this is, whatever it's become, we don't have to pretend." Her eyes flickered to mine, wide, searching, as if she were weighing the gravity of a decision I had no right to influence. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "I shouldn't. I could lose everything." I shook my head, letting the frustration and longing spill over. "And I could lose you if we don't try." The words sounded brash even to me, but I couldn't stop. The truth had to be said, raw and messy, even if it scared her. For a moment, silence fell, heavy, trembling, and impossibly intimate. Then she exhaled slowly, a shiver running through her body that mirrored my own. "You're reckless," she said softly, a faint smile tugging at her lips, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Maybe," I admitted, stepping closer until the distance between us was negligible. "But I'm not wrong." And then it happened, the brush of hands, light at first testing boundaries. Her fingers lingered on mine, as if she were anchoring herself, or perhaps anchoring me. My thumb traced hers, careful, reverent, and in that simple, human gesture, the weight of everything, the fear, the risk, the age gap, the legal impossibility, melted into a single undeniable truth. We were drawn to each other completely and irreversibly. She bit her lip, eyes darting away. "God, this is insane," she murmured, almost to herself. "I shouldn't feel this way." "Insane or not, it's real," I said. My chest ached with a mixture of desire, hope, and fear. "And you can't pretend it away anymore." Her gaze lifted to mine, unwavering this time, and in it I saw everything I had hoped for: acknowledgement, surrender, and the fragile courage to cross the line we had danced around for days. And yet, even in that moment of clarity, reality pressed in. The doorbell could ring again, a message could arrive, someone could enter. The world outside our fragile bubble was still there, reminding us that our choice carried consequences. She leaned closer, just enough that I could feel her breath against my skin, and whispered, "Then we take it, right? This, whatever this is, we don't run." I nodded, though my heart thumped like it would burst. "We don't run." For a heartbeat, everything paused. The risk, the tension, the city, the papers, the judgment of others. And there was only us. Two flawed, messy, impossibly human people, finally acknowledging the pull that had drawn us together from the start. And then, the faint sound of a car horn outside reminded me that the world had not stopped. We held each other in that fragile pause, knowing this moment might be ours, but that tomorrow everything could shift again. The morning light slanted through the blinds, painting Eleanor's apartment in warm streaks of gold. For the first time in days, the city didn't feel like a blur of chaos. It felt like a living, breathing witness to something fragile and real. I found her in the kitchen, barefoot and serene, stirring a pot of coffee with quiet concentration. Her robe had been replaced by a soft sweater, and her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. The tension of the previous days had not vanished completely, but it had softened, like a storm finally letting up. "Morning," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. She smiled without looking at me. "Morning." The pause that followed was long, comfortable, no longer loaded with unspoken rules. For a moment, it felt like we were simply two people, two flawed hearts, inhabiting the same space without pretense or fear. We moved together through the small, ordinary routines, pouring coffee, leaning against the counter, exchanging quiet observations about the city below. Nothing about it was dramatic. Nothing about it was grandiose. And yet every glance, every small brush of her hand, carried the weight of everything we'd confessed, everything we'd risked. Do you ever think about what comes next? I asked careful. I didn't want to rush, but I needed to know that she was thinking the same thing. She paused, then lifted her eyes to meet mine. There was honesty there, raw and unpolished, but also hope. I think we take it one day at a time. We've been reckless, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I don't want to hide. Not from you, not from myself. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. One day at a time, I repeated, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. The weight of age, legality, and past mistakes didn't vanish, but it became manageable because we weren't alone anymore. We moved to the couch, sitting close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other. No words were needed. A brush of a hand, the tilt of a head, the quiet inhale of shared space. It said everything we couldn't yet put into language. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not in her world fully, perhaps, but in the part of it she was willing to share. And she, in turn, allowed herself to be seen by me. The Eleanor behind the poised, untouchable exterior, soft, vulnerable, and human. We didn't promise forever. We didn't make grand declarations. But as the sunlight shifted, glinting off the silverware and coffee mugs, we both understood the unspoken truth. This was ours, messy and imperfect and entirely real. And as I left later that morning, lingering at the doorway, I caught her gaze one last time. A look that said fear, desire, hope, and acceptance all at once. I knew we had crossed the threshold, that we had chosen this fragile, beautiful connection, and that nothing could ever be the same. The city hummed below, indifferent, yet somehow part of our story. And in that quiet moment, I realized the simplest truths are often the hardest to reach. Love doesn't need perfection. It only needs courage. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?